Hello and welcome back to the Open Sorcery. It's Devi, and today I am joined by my co-host Twisted.
Yo.
And we are going to be discussing the long-awaited astrology. So, honestly, this has been on the back burner for a while because astrology is incredibly intensive.
There's a lot of shit that goes into it.
There's so much shit that goes into it. I know in terms of pop astrology, everyone's like, oh, I'm a Cancer. I'm an Aries. I'm this. I'm that. And there is I want to call it a lack of understanding that you are so far much more than just your sun sign. Your sun sign is the brightest spot, but that sure as shit is not the only spot.
Oh, yes. Overgeneralization and all that sort of thing. And, of course, since this is such a broad topic, we'll go ahead and talk about pretty much like the generalized things in terms of covering 8 charts, what have you, or the main aspects. We're not going to get too deep into specifics of various things, but we'll definitely... Hopefully, if you listen all the way through, or at least, most of the way through, you'll get the impression that there's a lot more than just one particular sign that defines a person, what have you. And of course, aside from us just talking about it, your own research and education on the subject and what have you, because this is one of those things that for sure you can go ahead and keep studying it and learning about it for years and years and years and still not necessarily fully get the scope of it, because that damn broad, what have you.
Oh yeah, and I mean let's go back to through the sands of time. So astrology and astronomy were originally completely intermixed. It was not a divide and conquer kind of thing, right? We get a lot of our information about what the things in the sky pardon me, mean from Mesopotamia, right? From ancient Sumeria. That area of the world is where a lot of this comes from. Now, there was, of course, a different take on astrology that did go through India and more in the Vedic texts, but we are not going to be talking about that one this time.
Oh, yeah.
Because this one we're going more through the Greco-Roman Hellenistic type of astrology. And that's there is some major differences. And the first one is the dates are fixed.
Well, before we get into anything else, I do want to say that, yeah, civilizationally, the cradle of civilization was in fact in Mesopotamia, but when it comes to astrology and the study of the sky, study of the stars, study of the different planetary bodies and all that sort of thing, that was something that humanity's been doing for a very long time. As far back as 30,000 BC, according to mainstream history, what have you, and probably even before then, and all that sort of thing. It's just that I guess there's more so of a larger cultural sort of putting together of astrological things and having that sort of cultural sort of glue and tie and affinities intermixed once the time that Mesopotamia and Babylon and once again Sumer and Akkad or what have you, all these different sorts of city states and were more so popping up, springing up in the region of Mesopotamia, what have you. And so, yes, it's something that humanity's pretty much been doing ever since we went ahead and started, rubbing sticks together for fire and all that sort of thing. And more so got a little bit more, started getting a little more complex than just some simple apes, according to, the current evolutionary theory of Darwin and such.
Yes. But it evolved and it influenced the Greeks, it influenced the Egyptians, and this is the tropical astrology that we use today. Now, it
Yeah.
has gone through a massive amount of change. And to be fair, personally, I like a lot of the more ancient astrology, more Hellenistic view of things. So, just as an example of the differences, the planets and luminaries that were looked at were the Sun, Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, and Saturn. Because Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto were not discovered yet. They were not in anywhere near the consciousness of that moment. So we didn't know they were there. It always makes me laugh how they choose the names of these planets based on the same mythologies that they were originally in. But it always makes me laugh, and then they try to attribute that exact thing or that exact deity to that planet, like retroactively. And it always like kind of gives me a little bit of the ick. But back in that time, that was really the scope of astrology. That is what we looked at.
Yes, in the Western spiritual and magical system of things, these are considered, the 7 traditional planets, and by that, this is also including the sun and the moon as well as planets, because in the older worldview prior to the 1500s and the Renaissance era and all that sort of thing, it was more so of a geocentric view of different planetary bodies and cosmic bodies, what have you, as opposed to a heliocentric one. And for those who don't necessarily understand what I'm talking about with that, pretty much centric is, obviously focusing centered around something. Geo relating to Earth, so pretty much like the Earth is the center of the gravitational pull of all these different things. Whereas heliocentric, helio is in reference to the Greco-Roman deity Helios, or Sol in Roman naming, that is about the sun. So it's more so of the worldview of everything revolves around Earth, and then everything revolves around the sun. Hence our modern interpretation of a solar system, what have you. But yes, the sun, the moon are consisting the planets, what have you, and then of course, as Debbie already stated, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which we still consider as planets today.
Mm-hmm. And goodness, I need to get this frog out of my throat. My God.
Yes.
But these were really kind of, oh gosh, if I can get my thoughts to go straight, that would be great.
Yes.
These planets were things that I know everyone has seen, like a birth chart. Let's kind of start there, right? We start with the circle because it is a snapshot of where all of the planets are in terms of the minute you were born, right?
Oh, yes. Well, you know what? Do you mind if I go ahead and take over and all that sort of
Go
thing?
for it.
All right. So, if we're going to go ahead and talk about a cycle and the cyclical progression, or just having a circle in of itself, we first got to go ahead and talk about the actual zodiac signs in themselves, which is what we were leading to before of a sun sign, and a lot of people taking stock into that particular sort of just one singular placement, right? So when it comes to the 12 zodiac signs that we use in the modern Western and tropical system, and of course, the various iterations and changes of the Western interpretation as opposed to any Eastern ones or any other sort of things, right? There are 12 particular signs that, are used here, right? But let's just think about a circle. So 360 degrees, right? So 360 degrees encompasses a circle. There are 12 zodiac signs. So you're dividing those degrees by 12, and then you get 30 degrees apiece, in which each sign reigns and has governance. And it's like the period of time in which they are, in fact, the rulership, or determine the particular traits or placements and all that, not just with your particular sun sign that is the month-long period of like, oh hey, look, I was born in this particular month-long period. Say, for example, I'm a Capricorn, right? So from the 2/3 of the way through December all the way to 2/3 of the way through December, all the way through to 2/3 of the way through January, right? That's the reign of governance for Capricorn, right? And so on and so forth for all the rest of the signs, which I'll go ahead and cover in a moment. But yes, that sort of thing, right? So you have this 360 degrees divided by 12 and 30 degrees of governance for each. Now, I'm going to go ahead and talk about something that is definitely going to be beyond the scope of this video, and whether we cover it in the future or not, you can go ahead and look into it yourself. But once again, that 360 degrees and that 30 degrees of governance for each of the 12 zodiac signs. There are sub-periods within that as well. So, how I was staying within a month-long period that, it was 2/3 of the way through? Well, you take that month-long period of each sign's governance, right? And you divide that into thirds. And then you get what are called decans or decans and all that sort of thing. So that is each 10 degrees of governance, what have you, for the sub periods within each zodiac sign themselves. And I just wanted to go ahead and briefly mention that, since we're talking about the whole, dividing up of the degrees, what have you, but not going to go any further into that. Mm-hmm. Something else I want to go ahead and state is that each of the signs I'm about to mention and the aspects of them, they have subtypes as well in regards to elemental subtypes, which, I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself in that regard, but, I'm just going ahead and making mention, getting out of the way, that each of the signs, while they will have a particular elemental, elemental attribution, there are also subtypes that I will say are a little more so contested and debated amongst astrologers, what have you, and different folks in that space based on different systems and interpretations that they have. So, with that being said, let's actually go ahead and talk about the damn zodiac signs that, are, determining what planets are in what particular realm of the night sky and all that sort of thing, to where we get all these different traits and aspects and all these sorts of attributions that people go ahead and place so heavily either in a singular sign, or if you go through the entire birth chart, in different spaces and different realms in relation to the different planets, what have you. So I'll go ahead and state them all by their particular progression. Now, if you've heard, us talk about tarot before, right, and what have you, the cyclical progression of these signs is similar to that of the major arcana for the tarot, right, and all that sort of thing. You have an initiator and what's considered the initiation point of the journey, the astrological journey, you could say, and then you have more so of a sign that's kind of like the end point, but then just bleeds into the first one again, and it's just an ever continual cycle that never ends, what have you. So, with that being said, around the end of March, you go ahead and you have yourself Aries. That is the first sign. Aries the ram. That is of the fire element, what have you. And it goes in a sort of elemental progression until, elemental progression of 4 elemental signs, what have you, which, for those who are unaware, in Western manner of spirituality, there's 5 elements, but 4 of them are more so terrestrially based, I guess you can say, where the other one is more so pure energy, or more so along those lines. of Aether, but the four more so terrestrially based ones are fire, water, air, and earth. So, with that said, in terms of the zodiacal progression of the elements, right? So, there's Aries the ram, that is of the fire element. Then you have Taurus the bull, that is of the earth element. Then you have Gemini, the twins, which is of the air element. Then you have Cancer the crab, which is of the water element. And that sort of fire, earth, air, and water continues on with the other 8 signs as well. And once again, I had mentioned before that each of these signs have their own subtypes of elements, but once again, we're not going to cover that right now. Just making that association for those who are interested in having a deeper dive into astrology itself. But yes, so after Cancer the crab, we go ahead and have ourselves Leo the lion, what have you. Then after Leo the lion, we have Virgo the virgin. Then after that, we have Libra, the scales. After that, we have Scorpio, which is considered a scorpion, but conversely also is seen as an eagle, more so in like its higher form, you can say, right? And then after that, we have the Sagittarius, the archer. After that, we have Capricorn, which is referred to as the sea goat. So once again, that's that subtype sort of thing, where it is of the earth element, but it also has the water attribution to it as well. And then Aquarius, the water bearer, which, despite its name, is actually of the air element. And then we have Pisces, the fish, which are two fish going ahead and encircling one another. So I'll go ahead and mention them again in their elemental attributions, because I didn't think I did so the first time around. So we have Aries the ram, that's fire. We have Taurus the bull, that's earth. We have Gemini the twins, that's air. We have Cancer the crab, that's water. We have Leo the lion, that's fire. We have Virgo the virgin, that's earth. We have Libra the scales, that's air. We have Scorpio the scorpion or eagle, that is water. We have Sagittarius the archer, that's fire. We have Capricorn the sea goat, that is earth. We have Aquarius the water bearer, which is in fact air. And then once again, we have Pisces, the water sign of the fish, of course. Because obviously fish, they breathe in water, what have you. So yes, having said all that, in terms of what I stated before, that cyclical progression, if you go ahead and study astrology, there is a story being told of the progression of these signs, elementally, but also in terms of the different traits in the journey that, is undertaken between these signs, what have you. So you start at Aries and you end at Pisces, what have you. And I guess you can go ahead and say that in terms of that sort of journey, it's going from Aries the ram, which happens to be, just to bring up a particular trait to go ahead and highlight the progression. Aries the ram is individualistic, and Pisces is along the lines of reflecting more so of a universality, right? And what have you. And then once again, you take that Pisces sign, you bleed it right back in Aries, and we start again from square one, what have you. And it's just a continual cycle. Even though I've taken up quite a bit of time in speaking on this, Debbie, but any particular thoughts or additives that you wish to go ahead and put into that?
Yes. And for this, remember all of these signs are star signs up in the sky, right? And
Constellations,
they are
in particular.
constellations, yes.
Yes, so various stars in of themselves having shapes being formed, what have you, and interpreted by different astronomers and astrologers throughout time.
Yes. But we not only have the attributions in terms of the star signs, and they have their elemental attributions, right? They also have correlations to the body. So I'm sure we all know what an almanac is, right? Like the farmer's almanac. Even in that, they specify on a day-to-day basis, this particular planet is here. Don't have surgery on that part of your body. But that's one of the correlations that I find really cool in that it is medical astrology. Like Aries. So that's where we start. That's the head. That is your head and your face. Taurus. Taurus is your neck and your throat. Gemini, the twins. That's your arms and also your lungs. Cancer is the breasts and the stomach. So very, it's kind of funny. But it's the things that we either nurture or we use to nurture or have nurtured. Leo is your heart, but also your back. Virgo is your intestines. That's how you process things. Libra is the kidneys and adrenals. So that's how we keep things balanced. Those scales, right?
Yes.
Scorpio, that's going to be your private parts, not just
your sexual organs.
That it is your sexual organs, but it is also like the anus. It is that entire area.
That can be used as a sexual organ, depending on what type of stuff you're into.
I'm going to ignore that statement. Sagittarius, that is going to be your thighs. That is like part of your powerhouse, right? Capricorn is the knees. Aquarius is, it says legs, but that's really like the calves, the lower legs. So that's your calves and your shins. And then Pisces is your feet. So that is where you stand. And that's also where you're connected to everything else for the most part. So these things correlate not just to positions in the sky, but also parts of the body. And then from there, they also follow patterns. So I'm sure you noticed the pattern of the fire, earth, air, and water, right? As it progresses. For every 3, so Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, that's springtime. Aries is the thing that spearheads springtime coming in. And anytime we have something that is spearheading a season, that is going to be considered a cardinal sign. So Aries is the cardinal sign for spring. Right behind it.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about what is a cardinal sign for those who are unaware first.
Well, like I said,
I will go ahead and do so.
Okay.
So let me just go ahead and find a particular reference point that I had, and I can go ahead and read that aloud pretty much. It's from a glossary of terms from a particular book. I forget exactly which one it was because I had screenshotted it a while back, and I mean a really long time back, what have you. So yes, here we go. We have right here the cardinal movable signs. So as Debbie already stated, Aries is in fact a cardinal sign, alongside other signs that are considered cardinal. Once again, we're going ahead and we're having 3 at a time in regards to the seasons, right? And these 3 different types of signs that are associated with, the different phases of the particular seasonal period, what have you, divided into thirds, once again, in this instance, right? So we have Aries as a cardinal sign, that's starting off spring. We have Cancer as a cardinal sign, so the water one, and that's starting off summer. We have Libra scales, that's air, and that's starting off fall. And then we have Capricorn, the sea goat, once again, that's earthy, and that starts off winter. So when it comes to cardinal signs, here's what it's all about. Oh, they're also considered movable signs. That's also another name to go ahead and get you a better idea, but I'll go ahead and read more so the paragraphs. These are so named because the sun's entry into these signs marks the beginning of the new seasons. In the northern hemisphere, the sun into Aries marks the beginning of spring. The sun into Cancer marks the beginning of summer. The sun into Libra marks the beginning of autumn. The sun into Capricorn marks the beginning of winter. These signs are associated with action, movement, and change. They are opposed to the stable quality of the fixed signs. Traditionally, they are termed the movable signs because they bring change and create inconstant conditions. In electional astrology, they are chosen for matters which require a burst of energy and a swift completion, but they are avoided for matters which require endurance and resistance to external pressures. In modern texts, they are usually referred to as the cardinal signs, a term used to highlight their seasonal importance, the word itself meaning something of primary significance. So yes, there goes your cardinal signs. And do you have anything additional further to put about cardinal signs themselves before we move on to the next type, what have you?
I actually disagree with how they have stated movable. I find that incorrect. It is more of the portent of change, right?
Oh yes.
The one that is going to sit there and say, hey, this is the direction that we're going. Sure, there is going to be resistance around it because there always is resistance to change. Let's be quite frank. But
Oh yes.
to say that it is movable, honestly, to me, feels very much like a fallacy.
Well, I'll go ahead and put it like this. And just picking one particular word, movable, is probably not the best, but if we're gonna go ahead and pick two words, what have you, uh we can go with initiating motion, or we can go ahead and just say, ignition or initiating in of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that starting process of the movement in of itself, right?
Yes.
It's that it's that drive, it's that go, it's putting that foot on the gas pedal to go ahead and get things actually going, what have you. Now, in terms of what you're thinking of the context of movable and more so fluidity, that will be coming later with the third type that we're going to go ahead and mention, what have you. But yeah, the whole movable sort of thing, it may be a little bit off base, but for those listening, you will go ahead and comprehend the interrelationships of these types of signs, what have you, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding from this conversation and/or your own independent looking into the subject of astrology. But yes, what comes next after cardinal signs in that seasonal sort of triad?
That is going to be our fixed stubborn asses. Um Kidding, obviously. No. My chart is quite a bit of fixed signs, so it's all good.
Yes.
But fixed signs. So that is going to be the one that is going to maintain stability in that specific type of energy. So the majority of that springtime where it's not so hot, not so cold, but it's actual spring where the growth really is occurring, or the seeds are like starting to sprout and whatnot, that's going to be Taurus. Taurus is going to be the one that is bringing that through. In terms of summer, I'm sure we all know the end of July and August heat. That abrasive summer heat. That's Leo. Taking on the energy from the cardinal and making it stable. And then from fall, we have the cardinal that is Libra, and following right behind it to create that stability in that autumn weather is Scorpio. And then in winter, we have that cardinal that is spearheading winter, and right behind it is Aquarius, stabilizing and dumping a lot of snow on people. But it is a stabilizing force where it's not too wild.
Oh, yes. So I will go ahead and read from the same term glossary about fixed signs. Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. They are so named because they relate to the sun's passage through the middle of the seasons, when the weather is fairly constant. Fixed signs are resistant to change and can slow down timing in horary charts. The influence can be good or bad, depending upon whether a state of permanency and resolution is preferred. As a detrimental feature, it can show obstinacy and difficult in introducing change. But if the planet located in the fixed sign is indicating fortunate circumstances, it can show the ability to maintain and hold a good position. William Lilly, for those who don't know, he is in fact quite a prominent astrological author, says of them, let us admit the ascendant to be fixed, and the Lord S sign also in a fixed sign, you may judge the party to be of firm resolution, no changeling, or as we say, one that will stand to maintain what he hath said or done, be it good or ill. And that is them quoting a particular work of his, what have you. And I do not know exactly which work it is. I would have to go ahead and look through references of his books, but what have you. Regardless, what do you think about fixed signs in terms of any additional things before we move on?
In terms of the fixed signs, it's easy to personify that as, taking certain traits from that. But try not to personify that on a person specifically, even though they may have these aspects within themselves. It's not just stubbornness, or it's not just the fixed signs coming through. Yeah, I think that's the end of that thought.
All right, yes. Then, what is next? What is the next? Part of this triad, the last of the three of this triad.
The last of the three is the mutable. So mutable is going to be the one that is heralding there is something coming. So they are taking two different, I don't want to call them necessarily extremes, but two different seasons, and they are knitting them together. They are bringing us the pendulum swings. So I know down here in Texas, whenever we're hitting some of those end of a season times, that is typically the times where we are hitting some massive storms, and there is a high potential for tornadoes. There is a high potential for, high energy weather events, because it goes from one side to another very rapidly. But the mutable signs are what is going to carry you through that change. Like right now, we are about to hit Gemini, right? No, I think we did just hit Gemini, actually.
We are in fact Gemini, I believe.
Yes.
At time of recording, yes.
At the time of recording, like we're just now hitting it within like last day. But
yes,
with Gemini, because Gemini would be the first one that's bringing us from spring into summer. Expect things to get hotter. Expect things to ramp up. Not only in like, oh hey, plant life, everything's bloomed, it's green, it's lush, but there is going to be a heat element. And, as majority of Texans do, we're going to go try and run for the pool. Because that's what we do around this time of year. It's already warmed up enough. Let's go. But it is that change. It's really hard to say for the most part, because it's an ending, but it is also a beginning. It is a passing of the baton. But like I said, Gemini is the one that brings, ramps things down from Taurus to ramp it up into Cancer. It's that bridge. Just like Virgo is that bridge from, summer and Leo into Libra and autumn. And Sagittarius, very much the same, is that bridge from autumn and Scorpio into winter and Capricorn. And then Pisces, again, is going to be that bridge from winter in Aquarius to spring in Aries. It's very cyclical, and there is always going to be that bridging factor.
Oh, yes. So, with that being stated, I'll go ahead and read this particular provided information from said glossary of terms about mutable, or alternatively called common signs, aka double-bodied or bicorporeal. Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. These signs correlate to the months that join the seasons and offer an easily adaptable nature which can be one thing or another. They lie between the cardinal and fixed signs and share qualities that are common to both groups. The cardinal signs initiate change. The fixed signs incline towards stability, but the mutable signs offer a flexible quality that can adapt to requirements and eternal pressures. They are mutable in their nature. This is a different kind of changeability to that we experience with cardinal signs. Those are traditionally termed movable because they have an active energy that seeks change. These signs are more passive. They respond to the pace rather than set it. This passive changeability offers a dualistic nature, which is demonstrated by their association with two figures, by which they are known as the double-bodied or the bicorporeal signs. Gemini is the two twins, Virgo, the maiden and the bird, often depicted as a maiden with wings. Sagittarius, man and horse. Pisces, two fishes. This helps to emphasize that there are two sides to their nature, through which they are able to bridge extremes. In electional astrology, their adaptability makes them the ideal choice for many situations where swift action but easy changeability needs to be avoided as much as steady endurance and stability. In other words, if you do not wish the event to suffer from a quick loss of interest or last too long, then you will utilize the mutable signs as a means to offer compromise in moderate conditions. So, additional thoughts when it comes to mutable or common signs?
Nope, I think we covered it on that one.
Oh, alright. So, now we've gone ahead and talked about the cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs and that sort of triad and how they relate to the cyclical progression of the zodiac signs and different phases of the seasons, what have you. Now, I think we should go ahead and talk about the other sort of cyclical progression that, in terms of astrology, that especially when it comes to those who are so into the new age movement or new age sort of thing, what have you, that you've likely heard a lot about, and that is the different ages, the astrological ages and times, what have you, that are more so of a macrocosmic thing as opposed to, say, individualistic to us. Now, by that, I'm talking about the whole idea of that we're coming into the age of Aquarius and all that sort of thing. Once again, you may be rather familiar with that, whether it's the song by the old soul band, The Fifth Dimension, or, generally hearing about that sort of thing, once again, from New Age sort of folk and all that, what have you. We're going to a New Age, man. It's all high vibes, bro, and all that sort of thing. Well, in terms of the cyclical progression, we went ahead and, we're talking about just now, right, in different facets of it, in this sense, in terms of, the month-long periods of governance for the sun signs, as we just stated, from Aries to Taurus, to Gemini, to Cancer, and so on, this sort of progression, it lasts much longer in terms of potentially thousands of years, what have you. There's no particular dates, what have you, of a starting and stopping, no singular sort of thing. These are things that are gradual changes within the night sky, right? And how they affect us here on Earth, through the lens of astrology. But this is going in a reverse order than that. So, with that being said, right, and talking about Aries, right, and that sort of starting point with the normal cyclical progression, we'll go cyclical. I should go ahead and repronounce it. But yes, I'll go ahead and mention the age of Aries, what have you, previously, as you can say that one that was quite a few thousand years ago, And there's a lot of, attribution and more so of an astrotheological sense. And astrotheology is a different manner of studying of itself, and we may go ahead and cover that at some point ourselves. But that is for, its complete scope of talking about the subject in of itself. But yes, in regards to that, right? The Age of Aries, that is more so when Judaism was initially springing up, what have you, right? Or shall I say, Hebrew sort of religion and belief system and spirituality was more so finding itself and becoming more so prominent and spreading throughout the Middle Eastern region, what have you, and all of that sort of thing developing. When Christianity started more so gaining foothold and coming into the fold, what have you, then we have the age of Pisces, right? And all that sort of thing. And then, of course, uh, Christianity having been such, a powerhouse for the past 2,000 years, that's, the estimated amount of time that the age of Pisces has been in governance, what have you. And then, when it comes to the age of Aquarius, that is what comes after that. So, just go ahead and name how it is in the regular progression of things with these particular ages. Normally, in terms of the regular progression, it would be Aquarius, then Pisces, then Aries. But in the more so macrocosmical ages, what have you, you have Aries going to Pisces and then to Aquarius. And each of these sorts of things marks different sorts of, once again, dominant sort of belief systems or cultural systems and what have you, not just in a particular region, but you can see in different instances worldwide, as
Mm-hmm.
well as, different value systems and principles that we can see across humanity in of itself, and what have you, that are going ahead and being instilled and or emphasized and all of that sort of thing. So, do you have any particular insights in regards to more so the overarching astrological ages in the macrocosmic sense?
In the
That
macrocosmic sense, I can think of a couple of things. So there is, of course, a theory, and it's not accepted by Egyptologists, obviously, because they have their own narrative of histories that they follow. But there is a theory that the age of Leo was actually kind of honored by the Sphinx, because the face of the pharaoh does not fit the size of the Sphinx, and they were a very precise people from what we can tell. So there is, of course, a leading theory that it actually was a lion instead of a man-faced lion,
oh
for the
yes,
age of Leo. But in these, there are so many different attributions to the different ages. Aquarius is seen as like an age of enlightenment, an age of collectivism, you know, more of we rather than me, which, to be fair, is absolutely necessary. But it's one of those things where people can't necessarily agree on when it starts.
yes.
And that's that's one of the things that brings about a bit of frustration, I do believe, because you have several that are arguing like, "Oh, it's the age of Aquarius," and they're like, "No, we're still in the age of Pisces," because it doesn't necessarily have like a definitive marking of time in a sense.
Oh yes. And even though we have a particular calendar that, for 360 degrees of a circle, a cycle, what have you, there's 365 days within a year. So roughly, based on our calendrical systems of, these sort of like, revolutions around the sun, that heliocentric model, right, of days that, are more so the modern system interpretation of things, you know, you can kind of go ahead and for the most part, ascribe it and more so evenly divide it, what have you, in terms of those time periods, what have you. And, you can say that maybe it's not necessarily the case for one of the more so macrocosmic astrological ages, what have you. But regardless of whether it's, the seasonal or the month-long periods or more so of these grandiose, multi-millennial sort of things, it's all gradual. There's no particular fixed starting or stopping, truly speaking. It's all gradual. And that's the actual true reality of it. Even if it is, oh yes, on this particular date in the calendar, we go ahead and we start the season of Aries, whereas previously it was Pisces, and then we're going into Taurus, and all that sort of thing. Sure, with our calendars, because we want to very much simplify things, especially in the West and what have you, we want to go ahead and classify and make sure we have a typified particular date for these things. In all nature, what have you, it is actually gradual. There's going to be bleeding into, there's going to be intermeshing of these sorts of things. So if you're going ahead and you are, a Pisces, and you're on the tail end of that Piscean month-long era in rain, you're going to potentially have quite a bit of Aries, kind of bleeding into and affecting you in some way, shape, or form. And that's more so into the specifics of astrology that will not be in the scope of this and, all that. But as you learn more so about astrology, you'll come to understand that's not as so strict as simply, oh, it's a particular date on the calendar. That means someone's this particular sign, and that's all they are for this particular placement, and all that sort of thing, But one thing I did want to go ahead and say when you went ahead and take a little detour about, an age of Leo, what have you, right? And there's two things I want to go ahead and state. First and foremost, right, in terms of any sort of Egyptology and, ascribing a Sphinx to a Leo sign, right? First and foremost, we're going to go ahead and have to think about that. That's definitely a different topic for another sort of video or conversation of, all right, you know what, history and all, what is not considered mainstream history, but alternative histories, and, how far back is Egypt, in terms of its actual, coming together as civilization and being, the different innovations that in fact had, whether they came up with, say, the Sphinx or if it predated them or all that sort of thing, right? Because if we're going by astrological ages and that sort of thing you're speaking about, right? So if we're going in that reverse order, right? So age of Aries, so age of Pisces and or Aquarius, that, we're having contention of what we are in, right? As you just mentioned, right? And we go back to the age of Aries. Prior to that would be the age of Taurus. Prior to that would be the age of Gemini. Prior to that would be the age of Cancer. Prior to that would be the age of Leo. So it's quite a few thousand years that we're going back. And last time I checked, Egypt in of itself did not exist, as a civilization by mainstream historical sort of attribution record. So let's just go ahead and give it 2,000 years apiece or so, right? At least 10,000 years ago, roughly speaking, in terms of that sort of thing. But secondly, I want to go ahead and state that when it comes to the Sphinx in itself, and this is more so something that if we were to cover astrotheology, I would definitely go ahead and state it again. But in terms of the Sphinx in itself, that's less of a line and a singular sort of sign, what have you. But for those who are unaware, and this is definitely one of those things that if you're just learning esotericism and different sorts of spiritual things in of itself, that you'll go ahead and you'll come across and learn at some point if you dive deep enough. The Sphinx is more so indicative of what is called a tetramorph, right? And that is more so of a Christian sort of figure or term, what have you, within that sort of thing, especially in Catholicism. So what exactly is the tetramorph? Well, this is an amalgam sort of symbolic being or representation of, when it comes to astrologically speaking, you know, the four fixed signs actually, right? So in terms of this, there are four particular heads in regards to the tetramorph in of itself, four combined beings, right? So we have Taurus the bull, there's a bull's head. Then we have, in regards to it, I'm going ahead and thinking of the fixed signs once again. And we have more so of a lion's head, I believe, what have you. And then we were going, and I believe that would be Leo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we go ahead and we have Scorpio, which in this case is not necessarily considered as, the scorpion. It's more so of an eagle, more so of a bird head, what have you. Once again, that higher form of Scorpio, as I mentioned previously. And then we have a head of a man, what have you. And this is something that's spoken about within the Christian Bible in of itself. And that is more so along the lines of, combining the different elements of these things and making it a representation of a balanced being, what have you, and all that. So the Sphinx in itself has the traits of these different, forces, what have you, different sorts of beings within it, what have you, and more so of a syncretic nature because, of course, obviously prior to, the Sphinx existed long before Christianity came around, whether it be, within Egypt in these sorts of mainstream historical sort of dating of it, or prior to that in some sort of alternative and sort of manner and what have you of, did it pre-exist Egypt as a civilization or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the Sphinx is more so of a tetramorph in of itself, not necessarily a lion, I would say, from my particular manner of understanding.
I completely disagree with you, but that is a conversation for another day.
Yes, quite a bit of a detour.
Yes.
But yes. So, that having been said, went ahead and covered more so of the overall astrological ages and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, now, since we covered the zodiac signs, their cyclical progression throughout the year, their month-long reigns, and then more so macrocosmic sort of thing, now we can go ahead and get into more so the fun part of the different planets and how they interrelate to these zodiac signs. And, say the birth chart, or if you're going ahead and getting a daily chart to potentially, just get a general sense of what the traits or the energies of the day are, and potentially intermixing and interrelating the two of how it may affect you individually. We're not going to go ahead and get into that, but we're going to get more so into the planets and what have you, and generally speaking what they're all about, what have you, in relation to the zodiac signs and what it could mean, how they interrelate. And then of course go ahead and talk about something I know you enjoy talking about quite a bit generally, which
Mm-hmm.
are the houses, which I think getting the specifics of those, that would require another discussion in and of itself.
I fully agree on that one. That will
Yes.
definitely require another discussion in and of itself. But
Oh
the
yeah.
planets overall. Okay.
Yes.
So let's start at the center
yes.
of our solar system, shall we?
Well, yes. Well, yes. And with that, there is. Well, before we get into that, right? I think we should go ahead and cover. So, you know how in the beginning we went ahead and talked about, people fixing on a particular sign and all that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, there are those who not just fixate on one particular sign, and that being the sun sign, but this sort of aspect of the big three, right? And what that is that it includes the sun sign, which also including the moon as another planetary body and the ascendant as well. So, with taking the opportunity to cover this, we'll go ahead and talk about this as a pretext and a little bit of a warm up before we get into the rest of things, right? So the sun, right? That sun sign, right? That's considered the conscious mind, right? your manner of personality, or how you go ahead and consciously think of and approach things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think about the sun in of itself in regards to a planetary archetype within astrology?
A planetary archetype on that one. So, if we're looking at somebody's particular sun sign, so that can be external ego. It's not necessarily the whole picture, but especially, if you're born during the day, and I am going to make that specification here. If you got a day chart, you were born during the day when the sun was out. That was the brightest thing in the sky. And so whatever your sun sign is, that's likely what people are going to have as a first impression of you versus, anything else in your chart. That does not mean that that is the whole picture of you. That's just the exterior crust, not necessarily what's inside of the pie itself.
Oh, yeah. So there's that, the sun sign. Now we have the moon sign, right? So generally speaking, if the sun is more so of the conscious aspect, you can say, the moon is more so of the subconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what have you. Or, the unconscious, or, if you want to say the sun is more so mental, the moon is more so emotional. And sort of aspect of, the primary, aspects of what a person is. Or, the central points, I guess you can say. But moon signs, go on. What do you think about those?
I
And how
mean,
they play a part?
moon sign, so that's more of your inner world. So sun sign is your exterior world, your what the public is going to see. Your moon sign is what the people that are closest to you are going to see. So think of it as, somebody that may be an extreme introvert around everybody else. But the moment that they are around their best friends, they are the biggest clown. Likely, they have a very charismatic and gregarious moon sign because they allow that to be seen by the people that they are closest to. That is your inner world. You protect that. You don't just show that to everybody.
Oh, yes. And then in terms of the big three, there's also, this is more so along the lines of what is considered within, charts as the first house, but this is called the ascendant, what have you. And in terms of what you were referring to as like first impression, if you would get, what have you, regardless of whether you are a sun or a moon sign, depending on your ascendant, a lot of times people will consider that as the first impression or the first sort of vibes they get off you, what have you, and all that sort of thing. And that being in of itself another primary central point or, particular driving force in regards to an individual, what have you. But by all means, speak on ascendants.
So the ascendant. Okay. So I have to kind of explain how houses come to be. So your ascendant is going to be what is on the eastern horizon at the moment that you're born, right? So your birth chart is a snapshot of what is in the sky. What is in the sky, like above you in terms of planets, the stars, all of that. Whether it's a day or night chart, the stars are always going to be there, even though you might not be able to see them. Or if it's below you. But the line that goes straight across, that is your, that is going to be your horizon. And what is on the east is going to be your ascendant. And so that is going to flavor everything in your chart. And I mean everything.
Oh, yes. So, generally speaking, that's the ascendant. And when it comes to that, I'm sure that you can go ahead and put a little bit more flavor on that when we get to the part about the houses. But let's continue with the other actual planets, what have you.
Mhm.
And once again, by planets, we mentioned the sun and the moon, and these are going to cover not just planetary bodies that are considered and typified and classified as planets by mainstream science to this time and day, but including other potential bodies, celestial bodies that are not necessarily classified as regular planets any longer. But we'll get to that. So next in a chart, when it comes to planets, right?
Mhm.
Say you're gonna have a sun sign that's particularly associated with zodiac sign, and that determining traits in relation to that conscious mind, what have you. Same goes to the moon. Well, then each of these different planets are gonna have their own zodiac sign. So next in that sort of progression will be Mercury, I believe. And by all means, speak about Mercury.
Okay, so Mercury is going to be how you're communicating with the world. Mercury is I mean, think of the Greco-Roman god, right? He was a messenger. He was the one that was actually getting people all of the communication that was going on. So, this is also your understanding, how you can communicate your understanding to the world and how the world can communicate its understanding to you. And that's highly important as a person because we are very communicative peoples. That's what we do. Like, I'll take my chart, for example, right? So,
Yes.
Cancer Sun, Cancer Ascendant, Cancer Mercury. That's a lot. So,
Yes.
in my sun, I can be seen as pretty motherly for the most part. I tend to bring that out and nurturing. That's just how I am. And both my sun and my ascendant kind of back that up. But my Mercury, because of how I communicate, I also communicate that emotion, that understanding, that ability to nurture people through my words. It's not just the aura that I put off, not just the light that I put off. It is how I speak to people. And that is the difference in my communication and how that would kind of flavor my interactions with others.
Yes. So, generally speaking, I think you went ahead and covered that rather eloquently. Now, next in the planetary sort of progression, and in this, you're going to go ahead and find that, after we covered the sun, the moon, there's more so along the lines of so from a heliocentric perspective, the further we're getting away from the sun in regards to that being the center point of, the solar system, what have you, and, what encircles the sun itself. So the next one in that sort of progression of things would in fact be Venus. Now, what is Venus as a planetary archetype all about, astrologically speaking?
All right. So I know everyone's just like, Venus is love and everything like that. No, not necessarily. Like, sure, Venus can be an expression of how you love, but it's also how you create. Think about it. The way that we love, whether it be physically or emotionally, spiritually, anything like that, is also how we are making something. This is going to be your creative streaks. This is going to be how you can flow. Now, Venus is one of those planets that gets a lot of attributions to it. And most people like to put, any kind of relationships and everything on there, but it's how you express yourself in a creative fashion.
Which can include things such as art.
Yes, very much
Yes.
so. Not only
Music.
not only
Yes.
that,
All these different things.
yes, but not only that, it's funnily enough, it actually has a large relationship with how you have a money flow as well. Because Venus is all about flow. Venus is all about letting things kind of loosey-goosey go. And if you're working with your Venus correctly, that also includes money.
Yes. So yes, and going ahead and talking about Venus, let us move on to, so, generally speaking, in terms of the solar system and planets and all that furthest away from the sun, that would usually be Earth, but we're living on Earth, and we're here. So this doesn't necessarily count. We're not seeing it from afar, we're living on it. So, in terms of astrologically speaking, we skip over that, and we get to Mars. So, astrological archetype, what is Mars all about?
Mars, honestly, Mars is your boundaries and how you go forward with actions in your life. Are you somebody that is really aggressive with it? Are you pretty stable and steady with it? It is really how not only you are protective of yourself and your boundaries and like your inner space, right? Because we're all going to have those points where, that's a boundary, don't cross it. And your Mars is going to kind of flavor how you are going to articulate that and how you are going to go forward if someone continues to press those boundaries. Mars is a planet of war and aggression, but it is also a planet of action. Now, I know it's considered a malefic, which is malefic is considered bad, but and Venus would be considered a benefic, so it's a positive. But I see Mars as just how you are going to be action oriented, how that actually manifests within you.
Oh, yes. Well, in regards to any sort of malefic or benefic sort of planets, we don't necessarily need to get into that any further in regards to the other ones. And I will say that where that comes from is more so along the lines of a different sort of conversation to be had, more so when it comes to Kabbalah and the tree of life system in of itself. Once again, that's for another conversation to be had. But yes, so in covering Mars right there, that's about action, that's about, drive, that's about all that sort of thing, and how that interrelates into you, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So next along the sort of progression of planetary bodies, we have Jupiter. So, planetary archetype of Jupiter, what do you think?
Jupiter is about expansion and learning, but it is also very much about law and order. And I am going by the historical context. Now, I know Jupiter has been kind of seen as like, oh, this is where you make money. This is where this happens. It's not really. Like, yes, it's absolutely about growth and expansion, but that is more in the realm of intellect, in my opinion. But very much law and order. Jupiter, if we're going back to Greco-Roman mythologies and things of that nature, Jupiter is the king of the gods. He's the one that makes the rules. And people are here to follow them. So it is by Jupiter's whim that we experience growth and opportunity.
Yes, and abundance and prosperity and all these sorts of things, yes. Now, in regards to that, going ahead and speaking about all that sort of thing with the Jupiterian archetype, then comes the Saturnian archetype in of itself. And you mentioned order in regards to the Jupiterian sort of one, but order definitely goes very much along the lines of Saturn in of itself. But aside from that, what about the planetary archetype of Saturn?
It actually didn't originally with Saturn. I know it has more of a modern connotation of, order and creating structure and boundaries and things like that. But originally Saturn was more so what is beyond the boundaries. Saturn was more of the spirituality. It was the harder aspects because it was talking about death. And And, that's some of the hardest aspects that we can have in life, to be honest, because, endings and all of that. But Saturn is incredibly spiritual. And I know it's been seen as very much along the lines of Big Daddy Saturn, he's got the gavel, punishment and whatnot, but that's not what Saturn originally was. Saturn was seen as the most spiritual planet because that was what the beyond is.
Well, yes, but we have to also consider first and foremost that when it comes to what is viewed within the night sky in of itself and how it relates to planet Earth, what have you, Saturn was the last, sort of planet that was used astrologically speaking before we go ahead and we get Uranus, we get Neptune, or planet, or Pluto, which we'll get to, in a moment. But so in terms of the attributions and definitions and the ascriptions of these different traits or qualities of these archetypes and all that sort of thing, it has shifted over time. Of course, back from however many thousands of years ago to now in the modern day, and divvying it up and distributing it a little more so differently. What have you, based more so along the lines of, mythological bases and all of that. And however the particular individuals, whether they be astronomers or astrologers or what have you, went ahead and titled and characterized these planetary bodies as they are more so discovered.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But yes, in terms of Saturn, you can go ahead and I will go ahead and make mention that the previous, planets of Venus and Mars, usually they are seen as a polarity of sorts, of say male and female, right? And what have you. And, men are, women are from Venus, men are from Mars, that sort of old phrase, what have you. And also there is a sort of polarity between Jupiter, which, is seen as expansion and growth, along with, Saturn, which is more so seen as restrictive or boundaries, and condensing, contracting, all that sort of thing that is interrelated, what have you. So yes, moving on, we have, I believe it is Uranus, and what exactly is Uranus all about from a planetary archetypal perspective?
So this is one of the more modern planets. It was only discovered in 1781. So in terms of how many millennia we had with the other planets having all of their stuff pretty much set in stone, Uranus was immediately given chaos, but it was also given innovation. So kind of taking from, I would say, Jupiter, in a sense, where it's taking that aspect of innovation and growth and learning, and it's also taking from Saturn the chaos element, right? Because originally Saturn had, the more spiritual chaos kind of stuff going on. And so it kind of took from both of those and kind of smashed it together. And now we have the mad scientist planet.
Oh, yes. Well, generally speaking, right, we're talking about, Uranus and what have you. It's more so along the lines of, you can say, ruling over our higher minds, right? And all that sort of thing, right? So you can say individualistic spirituality and all of that sort of thing, right? Into an individual higher self, I guess you can say, what have you, and how that interrelates to, say, the earthly self, and all that sort of thing, because generally speaking, when it comes to Uranus, this is the Titan or the protogenos in the Greco-Roman mythos of the sky in of itself. So sky being higher in heavens and being that person, that personal persona that, personification of the sky and the heavens in of itself, you can say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what have you. So that's more so of the individual sort of like higher self or spirituality and that sort of manner of expression, astrologically speaking, within the chart. Now, next comes Neptune. And what do you have to say about Neptune from a archetypal perspective?
From an archetypal perspective, Neptune took a lot. Neptune has been seen as the unconscious illusion, um, everything that is to do with fluidity of spirituality.
Yes.
That's really what I got to say about Neptune. I don't necessarily like. Let me preface this. I still use the outer planets because I consider all three of these outer planets, but I don't necessarily agree with their attributions.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and say that when it comes to the quote unquote outer planets you typify them as, that I think the attributions are rather accurate, and that's also, in generally speaking, right? That they're more so allowing for more so the depth, what have you, and like allowing for the actual, like, you know, being able to have the specific, I guess you can say is better for comprehension of all that goes into an individual with these different planets having these aspects in of themselves, and I deem it accurate, what have you. But just generally speaking, I think that their inclusion has improved astrology as opposed to say hinder or mischaracterize these different sort of things. But that's something we can agree to disagree upon in our own different sort of interpretations. But Neptune in of itself, if you want to say that Uranus is more so individual spirituality, right? And more so of that higher mind, what have you. Neptune is more so of collective spirituality, right? And collective metaphysics, what have you. So more so of like a universal sort of like where do you fit in more so the grander collective humanity and the collective evolution of humanity in of itself, what have you, and all this sort of thing, right? So in that sort of regard, there goes another sort of polarity, planetarily speaking, right? The individual spirituality versus the sort of collective spirituality and what have you. But moving on from that, we come to Pluto, which, as stated before, not all the things that are considered planets, astrologically speaking, are considered as planets by, mainstream science, what have you. Originally it was, but now it's considered a dwarf planet due to its size. And I think, yeah, don't disrespect Pluto like that. That's a damn planet. Because I've been around since before they went ahead and made that change. And I learned that Pluto was, in fact, a planet. So I'm sticking with that. But yes, generally speaking, from a planetary archetypal perspective, what is Pluto all about?
Honestly, Pluto is all about death and rebirth. But there is also the additional attribution of money here. Because as much as Pluto or Hades was the god of the underworld, he was also the god of wealth. And that attribution has been placed on Pluto as well.
Well, in terms of astrological sort of things in modern astrology, I don't necessarily think such is the case or necessarily as common the case, right? Maybe
Uh,
more so specific
no.
variations, but generally speaking, I don't believe so.
Uh, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Yes. So once again, agreeing to disagree, and more so of a thing for those listening to go ahead and educate yourselves further on, what have you. But generally speaking, from my comprehension, I do not believe it is something that is usually associated with the sign of Pluto or the planet of Pluto in of itself. And I guess you can say basic bitch astrology, right? And more so like general, sort of thing. But moving on. So, in covering the planets and general sorts of things about them, right? And all that sort of thing. What we find next on a chart is the houses, which I know you have quite a bit to go ahead and speak about, and not getting all too deep into the perspectives of houses in themselves, but let's just go ahead and talk about, we already spoke on the ascendant, so let's just go ahead and talk about how houses themselves are figured, right? How are houses determined?
So houses are determined by the hour and minute of your birth. So, like I've said before, it was a snapshot of the sky. So, before we talked about how the star signs create this circle that is 360 degrees. Each of them have 30 degrees, right? So, overlay on that a 24-hour progression, and that is the houses of the chart. Now, it always starts, like I said previously, on that eastern horizon. That is always going to be the ascendant. And then it actually goes backwards. So the first house is underneath, the first 30 degrees underneath the horizon, because it is rising up over the horizon, and it goes backwards from there. So as we progress through, 1 through 6 is actually below the horizon. 7 through 12 is above the horizon. Now, there are a couple of points in the chart itself that need a little bit of explaining. We already did the ascendant. That's going to be the eastern horizon. The descendant, opposite of that, is going to be the western horizon. What star sign is on the western horizon that you can see literally the stars going down underneath the horizon, right?
Yes, so which house would that be numerically speaking?
That would be the 7th house.
Yes.
So it's descending.
Yes.
And
so
then
12 houses in total.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say 6 per, so yes.
Mm-hmm.
Two halves of 6 that are determined by an ascendant or descendant.
Yes. And then, oh goodness, I'm trying to remember midheaven. So this one is going to be a little more complicated, but midheaven is the highest point in the sky during that time. Now, it is going to be a little tilted because of the axial tilt of the Earth. So, dependent on what time of year you're born, it can either be like in the 9th house or it can be in the 10th house. That's really going to all depend on the axial tilt. Okay. And then there is the bottom point. So that's the highest point of the sky was the midheaven. And then the bottom point, which I believe is the IC. I can't remember what it stands for at present, but that is like your roots. That is the lowest point of the chart. So the highest point of the chart is going to be talking about what you can do to get attention, the things that you are going to be praised for, while the roots, or the lowest part of the chart, is going to be talking about home and, how all of that forms you as a person.
Yes, so the IC stands for Imam Coeli, what have you.
I always forget that one.
Yes. Which I will go ahead and, not necessarily knowing all too much about a particular phrase in of itself, I'm just going to take a guess that it's probably Latin. What have you.
I believe so.
But yes, so in having covered all that sort of thing, that is the houses and what have you. And just generally speaking, the particular focal points of the houses, and of course, there's 12 houses in themselves, and it starts with an ascendant. And so you're using your own chart as example. So you're a Cancer, right?
Yes.
So say the second house, what sign would that be?
For me, my second house is Leo. So
So yeah, that
as we go
forward
through,
moving
yeah,
progression, right? That
yes,
forward
but
moving
it's
progression,
going
and yeah.
down. It goes backwards.
Well, it goes backward. Well, in terms of the first one being Cancer and the second one being Leo, right? Would that not, in fact, be just the forward manner of progression that we usually see in terms of that's the starting point of Cancer, and it'll go ahead and end up in the sign that precedes it with Gemini, and as the 12th house?
I say backwards because most of the time we are used to a clockwise motion, correct? So if we're looking at the sky and we're looking from the north, it's going to go in a clockwise motion, east to west. But the chart goes in a counterclockwise motion where instead of, my Cancer ascendant going to Leo in a clockwise motion, it goes in a counterclockwise motion underneath the horizon.
Well, yes, but just in terms of the general progression seasonally of the zodiac signs and
Mm-hmm.
our, modern general understanding of it, it's a forward progression of that
And
thing
it's
that
a
we are
forward
used to.
progression of that, yes.
Yes, yes. So, in terms of that, say for example, if you have a Cancer ascendant just like Debbie, it'll go to Leo in the second house, and then Virgo in the third house, and Libra in the fourth house, and so on. But that's the houses, and in terms of getting into the specifics of what each house is about and all sort of thing, I think that takes a different subject, a different topic, different discussion in of itself to get to those sorts of intricacies, what
Yes.
have you. But yes, and I think we can go ahead and wrap this conversation of astrology in this general overview in a nice little bow, what have you, based on the breadth of what was covered already. And just to go ahead and just mention for those who may be interested in learning about astrology, right? There's definitely other aspects that are not necessarily just upon first glance are not necessarily as covered or as gone ahead and discuss. You're gonna have to head and learn a bit more about astrology itself. But there's such aspects, and the names of these aspects, for more specifics, would be the Chiron, or say the part of fortune, or the white moon, or the white moon Selena, or the black moon Lilith, what have you, and all the different sorts of what are considered, the north node, the south node, all these different sorts of other positions and points, whether they be actual based on say comets or other bodies out there in the cosmos, or quote unquote imaginary, or approximate positions of things, what have you. And these are just a couple examples, but it gets way more complex and intricate, however deep you want to get into it. But
Mm-hmm.
those are topics that we may potentially cover another time, but there's plenty of resource material in regards to those sorts of things if you're interested in furthering yourself. Now, in terms of resource material, there's plenty of books on the damn subject of astrology, and to get a general understanding, not really to, I guess you can say, really go wrong with them, but I do want to go ahead and allow for you to speak about one particular book that we have gone ahead and recommended previously when we did our book recommendations a while back, the initial sort of like 10 list that we gave, right? And this is a book that I know that you've used rather often, in your own sort of individual sort of chart readings, or when I've actually been present, we've gone ahead and done them. So by all means, go ahead and share what that book is.
Oh, thanks. I'm terrible with names, and you didn't bring this up beforehand. You
Oh,
butt.
okay. Well, it is Inside Degrees,
Thank you.
and I believe you should have that copy nearby. Who, in fact, is the author of Inside Degrees?
It's actually a book that is put away in a box at present,
Oh,
but
okay. But I will
uh,
go ahead and find it then. I will go ahead and find it in regards to the Book of Inside Degrees. So yes, let me go ahead and find that out. But yes, generally speaking about Inside Degrees, while I'm finding the author name, please give a general synopsis of what it is good for, or at least how you have gone ahead and utilized it.
so Inside Degrees helps gain a better understanding, especially if you are a visual person, in terms of what each degree of each sign really is like bringing a flavor of. And I'm going to keep saying like a flavor of because there is so many different aspects to these things that each one is like a different spice, like in a stew. There's so many different spices that come together and make a big meal that this is just one of those individualistic spices. So it kind of gives a visual overview of the feeling of that degree, which I think is really cool because it paints the picture for you. It paints the story for you. And especially if you are a visual person like myself, it helps.
Oh yes. So generally speaking, when it comes to Inside Degrees, you know, as we have stated numerous times throughout this conversation, there's 360 degrees in a circle in a cycle. And of course, 30 degrees of a period of governance. And, for each of said signs, what have you, and to whichever planet it happens to fall upon, whichever degree of said sign in that 360-degree thing, in that 30-degree period of governance, this book is very good at getting more so specifics in regards to what that planet in a zodiacal relationship is all about, what have you. And now, in regards to the book in of itself, to give more so the full title, and there will be a link and what have you to either Amazon affiliate and or just Goodreads in general for the book itself. But it is called Inside Degrees, Developing Your Soul Biography Using the Chandra Symbols, and the author's name is Elias Lonsdale. Once again, Inside Degrees by Elias Lonsdale. So, and that sort of thing. If you're looking to get more specific when it comes to astrology, whether you're reading for yourself or for others, what have you, as you further along your knowledge base on the topic, I would say that based on my experience of what Debbie has gone ahead and read for me and or those that we know and I've been witness to, that's pretty darn accurate and very helpful and very insightful in of itself. Any additional thoughts on that?
No, I think I pretty much stated.
All right, so yes. So you think we're all good? We covered the gamut of what we should have covered and all that?
I think we have covered a decent beginning point. There is a lot more to astrology because it is like we are barely scratching the surface here. Um,
Yes.
but we may continue further on.
Yes. So yes. By all means, go ahead and close this out then.
All right. So this has been Devi and Twisted
Yes.
on the Opener Sorcery about astrology. You guys have a fantastic night, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.
Stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.